Field Trips features real field stories told by real ASCE members. This episode of Field Trips is sponsored by Tensar.
Hey everybody, this is Kevin Franke from Brigham Young University, and this is my field trip. So about 12 years ago, when I was working for the firm Kleinfelder as a staff engineer, one of my staff engineer colleagues was out doing some borings in a part of Utah called Lehi. Today, that's where we have silicon slopes. And we were doing a highway expansion, and these were some exploratory drillings. And the goal was for these borings to get down to about 75 or 80 feet. And the drilling had gone perfect, just smooth, no problems for my colleague. But in the last 5 feet, I mean, it's always the last 5 feet, right? In the last 5 feet, the drill rig started to chatter and shake, which is an indication that they had punched into some gravel. And now this is a reason to panic. When you punch into gravel when you're in the valleys in Utah, that usually means you busted into an artesian layer. To show you what this looks like in a cross section, imagine that we have the mountain on the west, the mountains on the east, and that we have some gravel layer that gets deposited over time. And then we have some lacustrine clay that gets deposited down in the bottom of the valley where the lakes used to be. Now, if I'm drilling a boring and I happen to punch right into that gravel and the water table happens to be up here, I'm going to get artesian pressures that come up into that boring. And, well, frankly, that's what happened. The driller lowered down the sampling tubes to do some SPT sampling. And as he lowered down the tubes, the tube hit the bottom, but they looked up and they saw that there was still like 30 feet of rod sticking out of the ground. So they picked it back up and they lowered it down again. And this time there was like 40 feet of rod sticking out of the ground. The driller knew what was coming. The poor staff engineer had no clue. And before you knew it, it started rupturing out of the hollow stem auger. Water, sand, water, and more sand just started flowing out like crazy. And they're in the middle of some dude's like, ranch or pasture. And so all of a sudden the sand's going everywhere. The cows are mooing, trying to run away from this sand that's like spilling out everywhere. So the engineer gets on the phone. He's like, we have a problem. The driller is trying desperately to get all of the hollow stem auger out of the ground. But with this stuff flowing, they can't do it. And it gets locked up and jammed. And so he ends up having to take a torch and cut the hollow stem auger. And it's still flowing. So they start trying to dump like bentonite chips into this flowing artesian well. Right. And the chips are just kind of dancing on the top of this water and getting spilled all over the place. The chips aren't going to do anything with that. They tried to grout it and it just threw the grout right out. They had no clue what to do. And so finally, one of our senior engineers, who apparently this wasn't his first rodeo, they called up the telephone company and they came out with a truck with a bunch of telephone poles and a big pile driving hammer, and they turned those telephone poles upside down, jammed it down in there, and started just pounding as many telephone poles down that hole as they possibly could. And you know what? About 2 a.m, it worked. It stopped flowing and it's plugged up. But I always tell my students that somewhere out in some pasture in Lehi, Utah, there is what looks like a cut off tree stump. Be careful of that tree stump. Don't sit on it, don't jump on it. Some unwary kid someday is going to be out playing on that, and that pressure is going to be big enough that it's going to pop those poles right out of the ground. Probably not. But anyway, I'm Kevin Franke, and this is my field trip.
Field Trips is a production of ASCE and the Geo-Institute.